In this slidecast, we're going to look at the contract and tender documents. So the tender document is the documents produced at the end of the design process. So we're talking about a DBB project here. So at the end of the design process, the consultant, the engineer, would have produced a design, and he would have documented that as a tender document. The idea of the tender document is that it provides the tenderers who want to build the works with all the information they need to be able to determine what they need to build, what the contract requires them to build, when it needs to be completed by, and what the rules of the contract will be. It gives the tenderers all of the information they need to decide whether they want to bid for it or not. They might look at it and say, yes, that's what we want to do, or they might look at it and say, no, we don't really have the resources to do this, or it's too big for us, or it's too small for us, or we're just not interested, or they say, yeah, we want to do it. If they decide to go ahead with it, it tells them what they need to submit. Do I need to talk about my previous experience? Do I need to talk about my track record? What's the methodology I need to produce? And to develop the tender price, they need to figure out how we're going to do the work, what resources do we need, how much is it going to cost us to do it, and how much are we going to put in for our tender price. So they'll put a profit on top and they'll put that in as a tender price. So it tells them everything they need. If they don't have enough information, then they may not tender, or they may put a higher price in than they would have otherwise. So it's important that the tender document is as accurate as possible. The tender document itself is composed of several parts. It needs to do quite a lot of stuff. The first thing it needs to do is tell the tenderers what the rules of the contract are going to be, and that's what NZS 3910 is. It's a set of standard statements for the rules of a contract. Like for rugby, soccer, tennis, you have a rule book that tells you what the rules of the game are, and that is what the conditions of contract are for this. It says what the rights and obligations of each one of the parties are. It says what are you going to do if, say, there's a variation or a change happens. What are you going to do if the parties are in dispute? What are the rules, the rights and requirements of the engineer? So you'll see that NZS 3910 is quite a significant document. It's almost 100 pages with the rules. And it's important that everyone knows what the rules are, and that's why NZS 3910 was produced, so that everyone is playing to the same rule book, so to speak. The next part of the tender document is usually called the schedule of prices, also known as the bill of prices, also known as the schedule of quantities, also known as a bill of quantities. All mean much the same thing. And what it is a list of the work items that need to be done to complete the contract work. So you'll recall that we did work breakdown structures, where we took a project and we broke it down into smaller parts and smaller parts. That is basically what a schedule of prices is. It's the project broken down into smaller parts. Those parts, those little work packages, are arranged according to what type of work they are. So if you're laying a 200mm diameter pipe, all of the work involved in that laying 200mm pipe would be one schedule item. A 300mm pipe would be another schedule item, and so on. It makes it very easy for both the engineer and the contractor to price the project, because you break it down into smaller parts, you put rates against each one of those items, add up all the prices, and that gives you the bottom line figure. So you break it down. The next section of the tender document is the specification, and this is a set of statements about what the required workmanship and materials are. And engineering materials are quite complicated things. For example, even an aggregate, a road aggregate, you need to know what size rocks, what size aggregate, what the grading is supposed to be, how strong is the parent material supposed to be, how's it supposed to be delivered to site, how's it supposed to be sort of laid. So even in just something as simple as a road aggregate, there's quite a lot of information there. So the specification can run to tens, hundreds of pages, just describing what is required, the material requirements, and also the standards of workmanship. It's followed by the drawings, which are the specific contract details. They will, when the consultant is doing the design, they will produce a whole lot of drawings to show exactly what they want built, where they want it built, and so on. These drawings are much the same as what you produce in your CAD classes. The last section is the appendices. That is any background information that would be useful to the contractor, such as geotechnical reports, consents. Geotechnical reports, for example, the engineer would have done some geotechnical investigations as he was doing the design. He will have found things out about the ground. Now that is of interest to the contractors because they have to dig into that ground. They want to know, is it going to be hard rock or soft soil or whatever? What sort of resources do I need to do to dig that soil? So it is required that you put as much information into the contract as possible. If the consultant knows something about the ground and he doesn't reveal it in the contract, then the contractor can actually ask for extra payment because of that. So the appendices are quite important. Let's look at the way now we're looking at the construction contract. So the tender document is just the first part of the construction contract. It is put out right at the beginning of the tendering process, and it is the principal's view of what the contract agreement is, but that is changed as the tendering process goes through. There will be changes in the tendering period. There will be notices to tenderers. There will be discussions with contractors, with tenderers. You know, this particular valve isn't available, how about this one? So those sort of things, those sort of discussions there, and each one of those discussions are recorded, written down, and they become part of that tender contract agreement. They modify it. So it might have been that you specified a particular type of bolt or valve or something like that in the contract, in the tender document, and then subsequently in discussions with contractors you agreed, discussion with tenderers, you agreed to use a different one. So you modified what was in the tender document by those discussions. The tender submission, remember that is submitted by the tenderers. It says this is who we are, these are what our attributes are, this is what our price is, this is what our methodology is going to be. So that's all in the tender submission. The resources that they have committed to use, the methodology, the price, they all become part of that contract agreement. Before the contract is awarded, there might be more negotiations about tags and other modifications. For example, the contractor might have tagged it and said that if we strike rock it would be $100 a metre. There might have been some discussions about it and they decided that if they struck rock it would be $80 per cubic metre. So that would have modified the tag in the tender submission in the pre-award agreement. So that all needs to be recorded. So all of these things here, the first four, they are all the development of what the contract agreement is going to be. Starts with this, and there are modifications all the way along. They all need to be recorded, they all need to be written down and put into one contract, one document. In addition to that, the tender acceptance letter, remember that is sent by the principal or the engineer on behalf of the principal saying we accept your offer, which is what these first four are, is the offer. We accept your offer. So that demonstrates offer and acceptance. So there's the offer, those first four, and there's acceptance. So it demonstrates that yes, we have a contract. We have offer, we have acceptance, we have a contract. And lastly, you'll have a page right at the front where everyone signs it to show that, to confirm that that's what the contract agreement is. But remember that the contract relationship is formed when the tender acceptance letter is received by the contractor, not when the contract is signed. All this does is just formalize that whole agreement. It's already in place when the tender acceptance letter is received. So for the next few weeks we're only going to be looking at the tender document. So we're just looking at the first part of it. It's the most important part. It's where you set the scene. it's where the most work goes in. There's not much work involved in all these other ones. Well, there is quite a bit of work involved on the contractor's part to put the submission together, but this is where the bulk of the contract agreement is. But as I said, it's not the whole contract agreement, all of these other documents there. So what happens is when you've right at the beginning of the contract, someone will get all these documents together and bind them together. They'll put together 3 copies, and these things can be quite thick, usually 50, 100 millimeters thick, so that they are quite big documents with hundreds of pages. And what will happen is that one copy will go, all 3 copies will be signed by the principal and by the contractor, and they will initial every page of those documents. That takes quite a bit of time. Then those documents, one will go to the contractor for his records, one will go to the principal for his records, and the other one will go to the engineer. So that's why you do 3 of them.